Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast. I'm Benny, and join me as we explore a Stoic way of life, one step at a time. Stoicism is everywhere these days. We can see it in books, listen to it on podcasts like this one. We can see it when we open our social media feeds. We can see pictures of Stoic people, busts and quotes and images passing by. And we can see it in the self-help sector. More and more people are going to Stoicism as a way of life. But I also hear from when I speak to people and when I read things online that it does let people wanting for more, and especially in the moments that they struggle. This episode will look into why modern Stoicism often fails the people when they need it the most. And that's not because there's something wrong with Stoicism, but it's mainly because of how it is presented and practiced today. Modern Stoicism often asks too much of people when they're already feeling overwhelmed. We will look at the core reasons why, and we will see how we can turn that into something positive, how we can actually make those moments, those challenges, help us improve how we live, how we can really turn the obstacle into the way. To do so, let's have a quick look at what Stoicism is. Stoicism is a philosophy that is based on reason and logic. And using that reason and logic, we want to interpret the world as best as we can to live virtuous and in accordance with nature. But as I said, we first need to be able to be reasoning human beings. Let's look at the basics of Stoicism. Stoicism requires us to be able to use reason and logic. That's what the ancients said, that we've been given by providence, by universal nature, the divine spark. That's what separates us from the animals. It requires us to be virtuous, to live in accordance with nature, to pause, to examine our impressions, and to apply this logic. And that assumes that we should have a specific set of mental capacity available to us, but that's not always the case. But, when we are anxious, when we are depressed, when we are emotionally flooded, reason often escapes us. And in those moments, trying to be a Stoic can actually backfire. We can start blaming ourselves instead of understanding where we are. Stoicism cannot function as intended without the access to reason. And some of this lies with the way Stoicism is taught today. It has become overly academic, theoretical, clinical, and focuses on concepts rather than on the people actually trying to practice it. Where it seems more, especially when we look at the self-help sector, that Stoicism is something to be figured out and not something to be guided in. And it seems as though, especially when we look at the more popular brands of Stoicism, on how it is portrayed in social media, and when we go into the broicism sphere and that manosphere, when we just have to have that stiff upper lip, the emphasis on support, on mentorship, and on lived correction, on being a society is often lost. And that's where the real power comes in of Stoicism. It's not just the self-help, but it's also the pro-social aspect of how to become a better individual within the environment of a group. And the way we see Stoicism nowadays is in sharp contrast of what it was back in the day. Because if we go back to the Stoa Poikile in Athens, where Zeno walked up and down those stairs, he wasn't alone. It wasn't practiced in solitude. He had his students around him, his fellow Stoic philosophers, and they used to debate on this stuff. They used to debate and talk about how to live it. They had their teachers, right? They had their guides, their mentors. People like Epictetus, he didn't start by himself. He joined Musonius' Rufus' school when he was still a slave. They didn't just explain their ideas. They trained them, they corrected them, they inspired them, they challenged them, and they supported them. Stoicism was lived. It was relational. It was practical. Today, much of that support structure is missing. We do have modern Stoicism, which has a Stoic week where we can kind of combine. There are Stoic groups showing up here and there. But there's also a lot of people who still trying to go about it as an individual and just by themselves. But Stoicism was never meant to be a solo intellectual exercise. It requires the minds of others. Modern Stoicism often reframes everything as self-reliance. And this framing is incomplete. Stoicism is deeply pro-social. We are made for one another. And sometimes the Stoic task is not to try harder, but to ask for support, to look for help. Because this support restores the conditions where reason can be applied again, where we can find the right impressions, where we can look for the pause, and where we can apply virtue and live in accordance with nature, with our nature. And needing support isn't the failure of Stoicism. It is part of the practice as well. When Stoicism is framed as pure self-help, mistakes can turn into shame, failure become a personal flaw because our mind will take us to places where we might not want to go. They cause us to think like, I'm bad at Stoicism, or I should be stronger. I should be able to deal with this by myself. Our minds can take us on a spin down to negative thoughts, and that doesn't help us. Again, that takes us away from reason. And this creates more pressure. More pressure. We don't need more pressure because life already is difficult enough. We need to focus on progress. And sometimes, in order to make progress, we need to acknowledge the fact that, again, we need help. So self-improvement doesn't mean doing it by yourself. Self-care doesn't mean doing it all alone. We need help in the moments when we are struggling the most. Now, what can we do when we feel that we are just talking ourselves down, being negative, and not looking at the world and ourselves as the way we should be? When we are learning and we are focusing again on the progress, making progress, we are working towards the Stoic sage ideal, which can be a very, very high bar. It is a very high bar, but it is what we want to work towards. But learning requires reflection. We need to know where we made a mistake. We need to know where we want to improve. Harsh self-criticism doesn't help. It shuts it down. Reflection can't be made when we are only looking at the negative parts. That's why we need to practice self-compassion. We need to be able to look at ourselves with kindness and to acknowledge the fact that we make mistakes. But those mistakes are important in the moment of making progress. This all creates a space for us to learn. Mistakes, they become information. Just as when we look at emotions. Emotions aren't bad. They're only bad when we let them influence our actions. But if we use them as a source of information, they can help us understand ourselves so much better. The same goes for mistakes. When we make mistakes and when we use them in the right way, they become reflection. They can help us grow. And sometimes we need a second pair of eyes, another mind, to help us look at those mistakes and see where we can do better. And if we do this in the right way, progress can become possible again. We can learn to pause. We can make the right actions again and build ourselves up from there. One of the other misconceptions of modern Stoicism is that it's cold, that it's hard and tough. But the message that is often missing is gratitude. If we practice Stoicism well, if we are objective, we learn to accept or even love our fate, we can focus on what we have here right now in the present moment, not too much on relying on the past, clinging to it, or focusing on the future. Then we can practice a real sense of gratitude by noticing what is already here, what we have around us, appreciating it, loving it. We can see that fate provides us with everything we need to live this moment the best that we can. Our minds, but also the people and things around us. All of them are here for us to use, not to be attached to, but to make our lives better. Now that we've looked at what Stoicism really is and sometimes where it lacks, we can also then move forward. We can see that if we learn to find reason, if we learn to see that it's available to us, but not every time, we can find support when we need to. When we're feeling anxious, depressed, or overwhelmed by emotions, we can take that pause. If we practice it long enough, we can take the pause alone. But sometimes we need others, maybe to go for a walk, to express how we feel, to take some time off. And then when reason has returned, when it is available again, we can learn to make the best action. We can learn to assent to the right impression, to do all the things that the Stoics asks of us. But for that we need guidance, we need mentorship, we need help sometimes. Again, Seneca said, "Why weep for parts of life while all of life requires our tears?" It's difficult to live. We're all in the same boat. We have different problems, we have different challenges, yet we can overcome them. And that's where Stoicism really shines, when we can learn how to use it to its full potential. And by finding help, by getting that support, that guidance, we can create stronger connections to the world around us, feel part of it, and then increase our confidence, increase our worth of self-being. And we have to remember that a Stoic way of life isn't about hardening, about toughening up. It's about learning how to live well and doing that one step at a time. Thank you for listening. And if you do like these episodes, like and subscribe and leave a comment of what you think is missing with modern Stoicism, where we can focus on more, what you lack, where you want to work on more. And then we can find some way to talk about that, make some new episodes. But thank you very much for listening, and we hope to see you in the next one.